Before I start the sermon, I want to ask you a question, and it's, are your actions leading others to Christ? And this isn't the actions of you actually going out and doing something. It's the actions that you do when no one's looking and when you're not trying to go out and do like evangelists or like going out and serving others and actually taking meals to people. These are the things that you do on your day-to-day basis, and the things that just kind of like the way you normally would act in what I'm going to call a default situation. So we're going to start talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and that's on Matthew 5, chapter 5 through chapter 7. And the Sermon on the Mount is broken into basically three sections like any sermon. It has an introduction, there's a body, and then there's a conclusion. Now, I'm not going to cover the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount. That would be a very, very long sermon. We'd be here until tonight. But what I'm going to cover is I'm going to cover the introduction portion, but mainly it's what I'm going to call a transition that's happening from the introduction and transitioning into the body, and that's going to be about the salt and light. So before we go into talking about the salt and light, let's look at the first 12 verses that's inside the Sermon on the Mount. And they read, "And seeing the multitudes, Jesus went up into a mountain, and he was set. His disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying," so here's the start of the sermon, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when man shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they, the prophets, were before you." So what Jesus has done here is he's taken your normal responses, and he's turned them around and said, you need to not respond in anger. You need to be more meek in what you're doing. You need to mourn for those, even though you may not know them very well, you may not like them. You need to mourn for others. You need to hunger and thirst after knowing the Word of God. After studying it and learning it, you need to hunger after it. You need to thirst for it. If you've ever been thirsty in your life, or ever been super, super hungry to a point where you just have to have something, that's the way God and Jesus, what Jesus is saying here is how you need to hunger and thirst after the Word of God and after them. And also he talks about being a peacemaker. Now, a peacemaker is one that gets in the middle of two warring people who just can't make peace between each other, and you would be the one that was kind of standing in the gap trying to calm the war down. And granted, if you're in the middle of two people who are actually trying to fight, you're going to end up being the one that's going to gain a persecution on you. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. It is great to be a peacemaker. Just keep in mind that their anger could get turned towards you because you're trying to calm them down. They don't want to, but still be that peacemaker. So these things are called the Beatitudes, and it's an attitude of a way a Christian should act in a day-to-day basis and in everything they do. So now let's get to the next 4 verses, and it's going to be the salt and light, and let's read those. It reads, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven." So this is the section I'm calling is the transition, because he's closing out the Beatitudes, and he's building back into the rest of what's the body of the sermon. So let's start looking at the first part and talk about salt. Now, salt was a very important commodity. It was during these times, all the way up until 100 years or so ago. And there was even recordings of soldiers being paid in salt, being known as your worth in salt. So, and there was a lot of everyone was looking for salt, and there was a lot of traders and a lot of people who would go out and collect the salt and sell it, and it was something very, very big in the marketplace. So first thing I want to look at with this is the purpose of salt. And the first purpose that pretty much everyone in the room can understand is that it's a seasoning. And we talk about this in Colossians 4:6, which reads, "Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man." If you've ever oversalted a dish, you will know that you cannot put too much salt in your food, and you need to be very careful on how much you put in there. If you've never not put enough salt in a dish, you will know that you need more salt. There are those that will actually, as soon as the dish gets to the table, they'll pick up the thing of salt and they'll dump it on there, and then they'll continue on and eat their meal. The next thing I want to talk about is it being a preserving situation. We read in Ezekiel 43:24 that says, And thou shalt offer them before the Lord, and the priest shall cast salt upon them, and they shall offer them for a burnt offering unto the Lord." So what we have here is the Israel has given up burnt offerings, and they've given it to the priests, and the priests are going to throw salt on it so that way it doesn't rot. It stays preserved as well as it can be up until the burnt offering, up until they get it all burned. Now I want to draw your attention over to Luke 14:34-35, because it kind of adds an extra twist on the salt. And it reads, "Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned?" Which kind of backs up into Matthew 5:13. But the next one says, "It is neither fit for land nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. He hath ears to hear, let him hear." So let's focus in on the 35th verse and get back to the purpose and talk about how the next thing we can see, it says fit for the land, which means it's fertilizing. Salt can be a fertilizer. If you've looked at your fertilizer that you buy, you will see one of the ingredients is called potash, which is a type of salt. And in here, the word land also equates to the word earth. They're using the exact same word, and it means soil. So you are the salt, the fertilizer of the soil, of where you're trying to minister. The next thing I want to talk about is nor yet for the dunghill. And with that, this dunghill is not talking about manure from animals, it's talking about from humans. And what they would do is everything would go into a hole dug in the ground. They would put dirt over it, and they would put salt on top of it to work as a disinfectant, so that way it wouldn't hurt anyone else in the area. The next thing is quantity. I've already kind of mentioned a little bit on quantity, but if you're using it as a seasoning, you're going to do a sprinkling because, like I said, you don't want to have too much salt. And then if you're going to use it as a preserving or fertilizer or disinfectant, you're going to use larger amounts. The same thing with when you're out there and you're doing and you're evangelizing. In some instances, you don't need to lay everything out on someone. You need to just give them what they need at the time, and then keep open and be open to give more when is needed. And sometimes you need to pour out the Word of God and set the ground right and set the fertilizer right and disinfect what was going on. And the next section is you are the salt. You are the one who is poor in spirit. You mourn, you meek, you hunger and thirst, you're merciful, and you're pure in heart, and you're also a peacemaker, like I said before. Now, this is about a couple months or so ago, the company I work for did an event where they invited the young kids over, and this is one of the experiments that they did, or the things that they did. Now, if you look at this, you'll see 3 different colors, but that really bright green one is just a piece of paper sitting in there, so it's all the same color. Now, to get these different layers, you have to add an X amount of salt into water. All this is just straight water with salt added in there, okay? So the very dark red color in the very bottom is like 4 tablespoons of salt in a container about 8 ounces or so. The middle color, which is supposed to be a yellow, but it's just kind of like a red or green color, that has 2 tablespoons of salt. And the top one that looks black, but it's actually green, has 0 tablespoons of salt inside of it. And so you can see how those things are separated. But you can also see in the very middle, in between the colors, how there is a fade going on. There is a fading from the red to the yellow and then fading to the green. Now, during this time, we can get to talk about how they would cast out the bad salt. There is no way you can actually get salt in its pure form and it go bad. It preserves things, so it's not going to go bad by itself. But what can make salt go bad is being defiled and mixed with other things that makes the salt go bad. And what would sometimes happen during these times, this is why Jesus used this illustration, is merchants would go out and they would collect the salt, but some of them would collect a little bit of sand with it and basically defile the salt. You couldn't see the difference because the salt was white and the sand was almost the exact same color, so you wouldn't see that, but it would happen. And then with that, the people would get it back home and they would try to salt their food and realize this is no good salt, so it's not good for anything. It's not going to preserve. It's not going to fertilize. It's not even going to disinfect anything, so they would just throw it on the ground and let it get trampled back into the earth because that's where it should have been coming from. So when you think about you being the salt, think about you staying as low as possible in this illustration of the red. Because as you allow the earth, as you allow the world to blend in and control the way you do things, you will move up into the green to a point to where you'll just be, at the very end of times, you won't be profitable in what you're doing. The next thing I want to talk about is the second part of this, which is light, in verses 14 to 16. And again, I want to talk about the purpose. And the first purpose of light is to illuminate. We can see that here today. We have tons of lights in this room. We have windows that the sun lights it. But God saw that it was needed in the very beginning of the Bible where it says, in Genesis 1, 2 through 5, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So the very first thing that God did was create light, made it to where everyone, to where you could see everything. And he divided those two things, the light and the dark. The next thing that light does is it improves your mood. It can change your mood. We read about how God set that up in the 14th verse and says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So what we're seeing here is that God used the light and the night, used the light to make seasons, to make it to where you would, it would affect you the season-wise. Now there are some who I think are awesome who love the wintertime and they feel great in the wintertime, like myself. There are others who are kind of strange and they love the summertime, they love the burning heat. But either way, it affects the mood. It improves the mood of the person depending on the type of light that is out during that time. The next thing, it's a disinfectant. Even before COVID, but since COVID it has become more prevalent, there's a blue light that they add to water machines and hand drying machines and everything. That is supposed to disinfect the germs that are sitting there at the time. So light becomes a disinfectant. It becomes something that gets rid of the things that aren't needed. Luke 8, 16 to 17 reads, no man, when he hath lighted a candle, cover it with a vessel, or put it under a bed, but setteth it in a candlestick, and they which enter in may see the light. For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall be known and come abroad. So what Jesus is saying in both of these passages, in both of these verses, is that when you light something, you're not going to put it underneath something. You're not going to hide it away. You're going to have that light, and that's why he's saying you are the light of the world, because you don't need to hide in your homes and hide sitting in church and not ever going out and never sharing the light that you've put on. The next section, you are the light, we read in John 8:12, then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So when he said in the very beginning of verse 14, you are the light of the world, and it's talking about his followers, those that follow him, to become a follower of Jesus Christ, you have to do what it says in Galatians 3:27, which is, for as many of you have been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. So to put on Christ, you need to be baptized. You need to obey the gospel. And then you put on Christ, then you become that light. You become the one that shines that light, so you let your light shine, so that way everyone can see. And you're being the salt, and you're not promoting that you're the salt, but you're being salt, and that light that you carry will shine, and will shine very well, and everyone will see your good works and glorify God who is in heaven. So that's the salt and light portion. Let's look at a few takeaways that we can take home from this. The first one is both are needed to sustain life. If you've ever been to a doctor, they will always find a way. They will measure your salt content. Salt is very much important in your life. If you decide to reduce the amount of salt to its very bare minimum, you will find out more health issues kind of come along. The same thing with light. Within the light side, you have to have light. It's that seasonal affective disorder that we all kind of feel once or twice a year, depending on how light controls your mood. Now, up in Alaska, they have like a month or so where they don't have light. And so they must sit down next to a light, like a lamp or some sort of that gives them the light and helps basically recharge them, helps sustain them. Otherwise, they would not feel very well after that. The next thing to take away is both have a purifying and healing qualities. So, like I was saying before, the purifying side of salt and the healing qualities is the same as the using salt to season, using salt to fertilize, and using salt to disinfect. That's the purifying, that's the healing. It keeps you from gaining all the impurities. Same thing with light. Light does purify. Light brings things out into the dark, out from the darkness, and puts it into the light. And you can see and you can take care of it, and it heals you by making you feel a little bit better. And both have penetrating properties. Both have that to go out there and actually penetrate through whatever it's interacting with. Salt is one of those ingredients that when you lay it on top of something, it just being there changes its environment. It changes the environment that it's in, and it allows the environment to be better, so that way it's good for everything else that might come afterwards. And then the penetrating properties of light is the easiest thing is to say, we have lights, and it removes, I want to say it removes darkness, but the thing about light and darkness is not something that we can actually sit there and measure to saying, this is how we measure darkness. Darkness is measured by the absence of light. The only way we can measure how dark this room is to see how much light is not there, from 100% down to 0. And that's how we know how dark a room is. So I want to end by asking you the exact same question in the very beginning. And it says, are your actions leading others to Christ? Are you doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing, or are you trying to blend in with the world and let the world kind of dictate how you react? Because you have two options out there, and the options is going to be either we will influence the world, or the world will influence us and defile us. A similar concept happened back in the 80s and 70s, 80s and 90s, right around that time, and with televangelism. When it came out, it could have been a great thing, could have been something that was awesome. One sermon could go out to millions of people at the exact same time. But those that were involved in it and those that were doing it allowed the world to creep in and allowed them, and it defiled it, and now televangelism is not doing as much as it could have been doing today had they allowed that to stay pure as to what it was. So if you're here today and you would like to obey the gospel and be baptized, or you have a need from the church, please come forward as we stand and sing the song that's been selected.